Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the whole Colorado experiment with Casey Viator that Arthur Jones funded and put together many, many years ago because it came up in my comments. So let me put on my plus 5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And people need to understand when we start talking about these business things, I don't want people again to think that I'm anti-business, anti-capitalism, because I'm not. I take a very libertarian stance on that. I very much believe in capitalism and a free market, but that also includes pointing out to people when they're being hustled and when something is really about business and not about truth or helping you. And people do need to understand the difference, that there are shady businessmen out there. When you look at Arthur Jones, he's one of these businessmen who, in my opinion, really did a tremendous amount of harm to the fitness and lifting world with basically the invention of machines. You guys know how I feel about machines. That's his doing. That's his doing, and he promoted the whole HIT system of, oh, you only need one set and all this nonsense. The whole high-intensity training thing, the same stuff that injured and hurt Dorian Yates and bodybuilders even quit doing finally. And I'm not a bodybuilding fan, so people are going to jump in here and be like, well, what do you know about bodybuilding? I am actually kind of against bodybuilding. Like the formal term, I'm not against people building their bodies. Arthur Jones was not a scientist. He was not an exercise physiologist. He was a businessman who already had a lucrative business before he got into the whole fitness world. And he basically invented machines and then came up with systems of training to get people doing machines. That was his whole thing. And he was already a millionaire before he got into this. And Nautilus, his machine company, made millions of dollars. The records are public. You can go back and see all the stuff. And Fortune 500 talked about it and everything. He made it into all these things. Very successful businessman as a result of it. And then you take people like whatever Dr. Darrington or whatever his name is. You'll say, well, he does have one PhD supporting all his work. And it's like, yeah, who he paid, who was on his staff, right? He was on staff for this machine making company, was hired. People need to also understand that when you have people who have a PhD who come and work for a company specifically in their R&D or propaganda department, it doesn't mean that they're interested in legitimate science, particularly when they disagree with the mainstream community. All right, when you have every other researcher and tons of studies and meta-analysis disagreeing with them, and the person who's being paid by a company is still pimping the other stuff, that means that they're not about science. They are doing it for a living. That's their income. That's their livelihood. They're a salesman. Right? You need to understand that difference. Just because someone has a PhD and has a science background, once they're on the payroll for a company, whether it's making machines, making a supplement, whatever they're making, they're a salesman at that point. All right? Do you understand that? They're a professional salesman who happens to have a PhD and is on their so-called R&D team, right? Understand the difference. He's a salesman, and he's made a pretty damn good living off of it. I'm not going to knock it, but let's call it what it is. So they took this experiment, and they did it supposedly in a university setting, and they used really weird stuff to judge his body fat and everything else. He ended that experiment with a body fat that human beings can't survive at. Right? He bulked up to 2.5% body fat. All right, so the guy weighed like 166, and they claimed he was something like 13.5% body fat at the start. Casey Viator, who was admittedly a genetic freak who had completely detrained, came off all steroids, completely quit training, dropped down to 166 pounds. And in something like a month, they put him back up to around 211. I think, is that what it was? 211 at supposedly 2.5% body fat. Now, they're claiming this guy went from 13.5% body fat to 2.5% body fat in a month while extreme bulking. All right. Anyone understand that this is not replicatable? Do you understand that no one in history of training or in a science lab in a laboratory setting has ever changed 10% body fat and not lost weight in a month without losing extreme amounts of weight in a month? You need to understand this. This is not how it works. Even drugs can't do this. In other words, he wasn't actually at that body fat. He was probably water depleted. They probably put him into their sodium depleted, water depleted, glycogen depleted. which messed with whatever weird settings. You guys need to keep in mind in the 70s, they didn't exactly have the best methods of measuring body composition. And it was supposedly done off measuring like potassium and stuff in his urine is how they determined his body fat. Do you understand that his water was manipulated with? He was probably already really lean. He was probably under 10% body fat, completely depleted, dehydrated, was down 20 pounds of water weight. And then they pumped him back up, pumped him back full of drugs, had him lift weights, eat a bunch of food, and bulk back up. But he was probably legitimately walking around at 190. And they probably put, and again, depleted of all his water and everything and detrained, and then muscle memory, anabolics, everything else, he probably did put on 20 pounds of muscle in that month. It's very possible. But it's not the magical machine methods that did it, because they had him train with machines 3 times a week, right? One set to failure type stuff. All this nonsense, claiming the guy gained 60 pounds of muscle in a month. Do you understand this experiment was done as a sales pitch to sell machines? And people still talk about it. They still cite it. It still makes it into publications. Hell, there's still articles on P Nation about it. These sellout companies, people need to understand that this is the nature of the fitness world. And this is the sort of bullshit that has been passed off in this whole bodybuilding circle as experiments and evidence that things work. Do you understand how ludicrous this was? Do you understand that the training protocols and the ideas that it promoted in this stuff that still makes it into publications today has been refuted with multiple meta-analysis and exercise science? That if you were to take this stuff and the results claimed to any modern researcher of sports science or exercise science who deals with real athletes, that they would laugh their ass off at you? But the bodybuilding world will still talk about it because they're basically stupid. The average bodybuilder is stupid. Let's just be honest. They are. They're stupid. And people who follow bodybuilding generally are too, and they'll fall for nonsense like this. And it'll still make it into supposedly well-reputed online publications and magazines and everything else. So this sort of nonsense still gets talked about. It's just a big silly scam to sell machines that should never have been invented, that we would have been better off with barbells. We would have been way better off if none of these machines had ever been invented. People would be more jacked if all they had was barbells and weighted body weight exercises and things like that. They do a hell of a lot more for you. But this whole thing was a farce, and it's ridiculous, and it's not even replicatable. It's not even replicatable. I mean, they set up the circumstances, and for all we know, there's no evidence. The guy was a multimillionaire. Do you understand that in those days, just to sell his products, he could have just paid someone to fabricate this? He could have actually just paid a researcher $100,000, some student at the school working on his graduate degree. Could have probably given him $50,000 or $100,000 just to put the data together for him and not even bother to do an experiment at all. Do you understand that? This was a wealthy man who was already making millions and wanted to make a lot more millions off of this Nautilus company. All right, this is not unbiased research. This is not a real experiment. And it's full of stuff that we know is BS. I mean, it even claims that he ended the experiment at a body fat that no human has ever been tested at with real testing conditions. You would be dead before you reach that body fat, claiming that he reached that body fat while bulking up and gaining 45 pounds. Gaining weight at over a pound a day and dropping at the same time to a body fat that no living human has ever been at. Absurdity. And people buy into this shit. And I'm sorry, but it is what it is. I mean, the fact that anyone can read this who is up to speed on anything related to body composition or modern exercise science, who is even remotely schooled in it, and I don't even mean in any formal way, anyone who's even read the basics, who could read something like this and think that this nonsense is anything but a big sales pitch and a farce, is scary. It's scary. But people fell for it, and they fell for it for decades, and they're still falling for some of this silly shit today. The things that people do on YouTube oftentimes isn't really any better, is it? People fall for it, and they buy products based on it. I mean, this whole industry has been built on nonsense like this since before most of us were even born, before I was born. I'm turning 42 later this week. And this is the sort of nonsense that was being pulled successfully in this industry before I was even born. Nothing has changed, has it? All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.